To Melbourne Tram Museum. Part 6, Tram History Section 2. Beach and Bush Tramway.
and Bush Tramway. Before World War I, residents of Sandringham and Blackrock were dissatisfied with the slow and unreliable horse tramway operated by the Beaumaris Tramway Company, which folded in 1915. After residents lobbied the state government, the Victorian Railways, VR, opened a standard gauge electric tramway from Sandringham to Blackrock in 1919, choosing a route that avoided the former BTC line to prevent compensation payouts to its shareholders. Residents successfully lobbied for an extension to Beaumaris, which was more open bushland than township, and VR agreed on the condition that the local council subsidise operations for 5 years. The extension from Blackrock to Beaumaris opened in 1926 but closed exactly 5 years later in 1931. To reduce losses on the remaining Sandringham to Blackrock line, VR modified 2 trams for one-man operation, but these cost reductions were insufficient to ensure the tramway's long-term survival. In 1945, VR decided to replace the trams with buses, and despite an 11-year campaign by residents against the closure, the Blackrock tramway finally closed in 1956.
Botherweek Tramway.
Botherweek Tramway. The Southern Hemisphere's first electric tramway opened in 1889 between Box Hill and Doncaster. In March 1893, engineer Henry Hilton took charge of the struggling company and kept it running through constant improvements despite Victoria's dire economic conditions. When the company could no longer continue, Henry Hilton leased the tramway from the 14th of April 1894 for £1 shilling, bob, a week, running it with his cousin William as their Botherweek tramway service. To cut costs, the Hiltons shut down the generating plant and let the tram coast downhill from Doncaster to Coonan Creek Depot, signalling the engine driver to restart power for the uphill run to Box Hill. On one terrifying occasion the brakes failed on the fully laden descent. Oblivious passengers sang hymns as the tram shot around the Coonan Creek Bridge curve, stopping 300 yards up the next hill. A shaken Henry said nothing and completed the trip. Despite no accidents ever occurring, the Bush Tramway was never profitable and closed in January 1896. William went on to a distinguished Melbourne Tram career, rising to Eastern District Traffic Superintendent of the M&MTB by 1920 before retiring in 1930. Henry worked in gold mining engineering before returning to Doncaster in 1911 as engineer at the West Doncaster Coal Store.
Electric Street Railway. From 1906 to 1959, the Victorian Railways operated an electric tramway in Melbourne, deliberately calling it an electric street railway to distinguish it from cable trams. In 1904, Sir Thomas Bent funded the line from Street Kilda to Brighton Beach, partly to boost his land value, with construction using railway broad gauge instead of standard tram gauge. The line opened in 1906, but a depot fire in 1907 destroyed the fleet, forcing quick restoration using second-hand tram bodies from Sydney. The line unexpectedly became successful, leading to upgrades, duplication of tracks, and introduction of new tramcars. The public popularly referred to the Street Kilda to Brighton Beach service as the railway trams. Unlike other tram operators, Victorian Railways lacked proper maintenance funding, and during the Great Depression and World War II, infrastructure deteriorated significantly. In 1942, new, luxury, trams based on Melbourne designs were introduced to meet wartime demand while reducing costs. After the war, the tramway was seen as less important, and authorities chose buses as a cheaper alternative instead of upgrading the system. From 1957, sections of the line were gradually closed, with a final closure in 1959 ending the railway trams era. VR Luxury Tram number 53 outside Elwood Depot in St Kilda Street. The design similarity to the contemporary M&MTB SW6 class is readily apparent. Photographs, Public Records Office Victoria. Change from train to tram at St Kilda Railway Station in the late 1920s. Photographs, Public Records Office Victoria. Footscray local lines. In 1916, Footscray Council created a tramways trust to build 5 routes around Footscray Station, but World War I shortages limited construction to only 3 lines, which opened in 1921 after takeover by the Melbourne and Metropolitan Tramways Board. The tram lines remained isolated due to failure to connect across the Maribyrnong River to the Epsom Road network, preventing commuter traffic and causing the system to operate at a continual loss. Between 1927 and 1930, upgrades like double tracking, removal of a level crossing, and introduction of one-man tram crews improved efficiency, reduced losses, and increased passenger numbers. During World War II, new munitions factories in West Maribyrnong and Footscray created jobs and increased demand for transport, leading to government-funded tramway expansions, though the lines remained isolated from the main network. Wartime operations brought unusual tram destinations like pyrotechnics and explosives factories, and in 1943 an army tank collided with a Footscray tram. In 1954, a connecting line between Gordon Street and West's Road was built, creating Route 82 linking Moonay Ponds to Footscray Station. Rising costs, declining revenue, and aging infrastructure led to closure of the Footscray local lines in 1962, replaced by buses, while Route 82 survived and continues to operate today. M&MTB single truck tram X1 class number 466 at Russell Street Terminus, waltzing for departure to Footscray Railway Station, on the 18th of January 1954. Photographed by Noel Reed. Wood blocking the road surface on the new Nicholson Street Bridge in 1927. M&MTB A-Class tram number 11 is turning right into Irving Street on its way from Williamstown Road to Ballarat Road. Photograph courtesy of State Library of Victoria. Hawthorn Tram Depot. The Hawthorn Tram Depot, opened on the 6th of April 1916 by the Hawthorn Tramways Trust, HTT, is a key part of Melbourne's tramway heritage. It is located at the junction of Power Street and Wallen Road, Hawthorn. It was designed by architect Leonard Flanagan in the American Romanesque style. It originally comprised offices, amenities, an electrical substation, and a 4-track tram shed, with a second 3-track shed added in 1917 by architects Sidney Smith and Ogg. The depot was strategically built at the junction of major tram routes, supporting services from the city to Wattle Park, Burwood, and Richmond. It also included a civil engineering yard, a workshop beneath the second shed, and facilities such as a stable for a horse-drawn tower wagon used in overhead maintenance. Formed by the municipalities of Melbourne, Richmond, Hawthorn, and Camberwell, the HTT electrified earlier horse tramways and expanded electric lines across the region. In 1920, the depot was taken over by the Melbourne and Metropolitan Tramways Board, M&MTB, marking its transition into a major operational hub. As tram traffic grew rapidly in the 1920s, the site's limited expansion capacity led to the development of larger depots such as Camberwell, though Hawthorn continued to supply trams and crews for key routes, including Chapel Street and City Hawthorn services. In 1925, the depot became a centre for tram driver and conductor training, later upgraded with larger training facilities in the 1960s. From 1940 to the early 1990s, it also housed a tramway uniform manufacturing unit. Structural modifications were made in the 1940s, including removal of shed facades, to accommodate wider SW6 class tramcars introduced in 1939. With declining tram usage due to increased motor traffic, the depot ceased operations as a running facility in 1965, though it continued to be used for storage, training, and other support functions. By the early 1990s, these functions declined, leaving the building at risk of abandonment until its inclusion in the Victorian Heritage Register in 1996. A major redevelopment completed in 2002 converted much of the site into residential units while preserving key heritage features, including reconstruction of tram shed facades. The remaining original shed was restored and reopened in January 2003 as the Melbourne Tram Museum, housing the city's heritage tram fleet. Today, the Hawthorn Tram Depot stands as a successful example of adaptive reuse, preserving Melbourne's tramway history while integrating modern urban development. References. Bibliography: Heritage Victoria HTT Annual Reports, 1915-19, and M&MTB Annual Reports, 1919-1982. https://www.hawthorntramdepot.org.au/depot.htm. Diversity Travellers YouTube. Heritage Council. The former Hawthorn Tramways Trust Depot is registered by the Heritage Council of Victoria. Designed by Leonard Flanagan for the Hawthorn Tramways Trust, this depot opened in 1916 and operated until 1965, serving a line connecting the city with the developing outer suburbs of Camberwell and Burwood. Victorian Heritage Register number H0876. Holden Street Tramway goes missing.
Holden Street Tramway goes missing. In 1924, the Melbourne and Metropolitan Tramways Board began building a major tramway workshop in Preston at the Miller Street and St George's Road junction. The Preston lines were initially isolated from the wider tram network, and expansion plans required connecting them so electric trams from across the city could access the Preston workshops. In 1925, new 1.6 km double-track line linked Lygon Street to St George's Road via Brunswick and Holden Streets, allowing Preston trams to run directly into the city via Swanston Street. By 1926 to 1927, further connections and conversion of cable tram routes enabled most electric trams, except Footscray lines, to access Preston workshops through the Holden Street line. In 1930, the Fitzroy cable tram was electrified, allowing Preston trams to run directly into the city, while the Holden Street line was reduced to an infrequent shuttle service. In 1939, the shuttle was replaced by buses and tracks reduced, but due to wartime fuel shortages, the tram shuttle returned and continued until 1957, after which the line was mainly used for tram transfers. In 1976, Fitzroy Council removed the Holden Street tram tracks without M&MTB approval during road works, and the line was never reinstated. An urban legend claims a driver discovered the removal when he arrived to find the tram tracks had disappeared overnight. M&NTB all-night car Q143 on daytime duty on the Holden Street shuttle service between St George's Road and Lygon Street in 1938. Photographed by A.K. Sewell.
Hooves and iron.
Hooves and iron, the horse trams. In the 1880s, Melbourne's outer suburban land developers needed public transport to attract buyers. Muddy roads defeated horse omnibuses, cable trams were too costly for low-density areas, and steam trams were rejected, leaving horse trams as the only viable solution. 7 lightly built horse tram lines operated on Melbourne's outskirts, connecting cable tram routes and railway stations to outer suburbs between 1884 and 1923, including routes to Fairfield Park, Kew Cemetery, the Zoological Gardens, Coburg, Beaumaris, and Malvern. Most lines were financially precarious due to the 1890s land boom collapse and the high fixed cost of maintaining horses around the clock regardless of whether trams were running. Some lines were later electrified. Others simply closed without repair. In 1901, armed bushrangers robbed the Hawthorne horse tram, escaping with watches and £24 in cash, and were never caught. The end came during the 1923 Great Victorian Police Strike, when arsonists burnt down the Zoo Tram depot in Royal Park, with no horses, staff, or trams lost but the depot and fleet destroyed. Melbourne's last horse tramway closed.
Tramways Depot.
Depot foundation stone. The Fitzroy, Northcote and Preston Tramways Trust was a Victorian Parliament authorised municipal body built to operate electric trams in what were then Melbourne's outer suburbs. Founded in 1915 to run a line along St George's Road from Fitzroy to East and West Preston, the trust was absorbed by the M&NTB in February 1920, before the line even opened on the 1st of April 1920. Preston Depot operated at the route junction until replaced by East Preston Depot in 1955, then served as surplus tram storage and workshop overflow until its demolition in December 2006, when its foundation stone entered the museum collection.
Sunday Tramway to the Seaside.
Sunday Tram to the Seaside. In 1915, the Prahran and Malvern Tramways Trust extended the Glen Huntly Road Tramway to Point Ormond to boost weekend travel to the beach. There was no direct city route, so trams operated only between Point Ormond and Darling Road in East Malvern. After acquiring the system in 1920, the Melbourne and Metropolitan Tramways Board expanded and electrified routes, improving connections by 1927. The Chapel Street service was extended to Point Ormond but later reduced due to low passenger demand, with a shuttle service introduced instead. From 1934, regular weekend services to Point Ormond were established, improving access from East Malvern. Sunday morning tram services began in 1936 despite opposition, becoming popular for beach travel. In the 1950s, rising car ownership reduced tram usage, leading to service cuts and limited operations. Continued inconvenience and declining patronage resulted in the closure of the Point Ormond tramway in 1960, replaced by bus services.
Bye.